Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast created to look deep into what it means to be a runner and endurance athlete. Our episodes are filled with real stories from real runners, elite to the everyday athlete. We bring together healthcare providers, athletes, and dive deep into topics that matter most to runners. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevc-Edwards, physical therapist, author, athlete, and complete coffee addict.
And I'm Dr. Casey Sinders, physical therapist, athlete, and pun expert extraordinaire. We're so passionate about changing running culture to improve the health, wellness, and fulfillment of our endurance athlete community. And we hope that these conversations inspire you to focus on putting your health first so that performance and PRs can follow. Now let's get to the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to More Than Miles. Casey and I are here today to hang out and talk about all things running. Today, we're actually going to talk about different running events and types and kind of what goes into the training, what things you might need to know if you've decided to do a trail race versus some kind of road race or maybe a marathon versus a 5K. We're also going to talk a little bit about track and field, mostly because we love it and it's going to be the Olympics or is the Olympics. And we work with track and field athletes all the time, so it's super fun. But we thought we would just kind of go through the differences because one of the things that we've realized is just because you run a 5K doesn't mean that you know what it's like to run a trail race. In fact, I can remember the first time I ever ran like a 10-mile trail race, I was thinking I was going to go super fast and it was going to be no big deal because I ran lots of half marathons and marathons. And then I went out on the trail and I had never been more tired in my entire life and everything in the whole world hurt for days afterwards. And I was completely shocked. And that was a long time ago. But if you've never done a trail race or a different type of race, you may not know that there are different things that need to happen when you're training.
Yeah. So we're hoping that this podcast can be a resource for you guys if you're planning on trying out different running events, because it would be nice to go in with some knowledge and some semblance of what you're doing. Obviously, being a beginner is the fun part of trying new events, I think. And so we're hoping to at least hit some of the basics today. So when we were planning through this episode, we thought about trying with starting with what we know best, which is track and field. The Olympics are coming up. And so that's really, really exciting. I enjoyed watching the trials here for the US Olympic team. And for me, it's part like extreme fangirl, gait analysis, and criticism of how people have come back from injuries to perform so highly at the trials. So there's a lot going on for me when I watch the trials this year. But it was really, really exciting and fun.
It was really fun to watch. And I had a great time watching it too. I mean, I love to watch it every year, but this year was particularly fun because we actually had a lot of athletes that were at the trials. We really started with our team about 4 years ago. So it was right after the last Olympics. And this is the first time we've had a bunch of athletes that we work with on a regular basis that were in the trials. So that was really cool. And it was really cool to kind of see them doing something that they loved and performing at that really high level. And it is funny, Casey, because right before the Olympics, the trials, so many people got hurt. So many people got hurt. And whether it was like a month or 2 months before, or even like the week before. And it was so sad. It was devastating. And there are plenty of people that we saw get injured early on enough that we thought, okay, they could make it and do okay. But then the way that they came back really put them at a disadvantage. And for us as physical therapists, we're looking at it and we're like, no, don't do it that way. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I know you can attest to this too. The weight of it being an Olympic year was very, very real. Everyone seemed a lot more stressed, obviously very determined. I think everything was in kind of a careful balance for a lot of these athletes because it only comes every 4 years. And there's just a lot of pressure because, fortunately or unfortunately, the Olympics is the pinnacle of track and of their running career for a lot of people. And so you could just feel a lot of the stress and urgency for sure, which is not something I necessarily recall from last time. And I think some of it had to do with the pandemic and whatnot. But this time it was very, very real.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talked about was the level of anxiety and stress and pressure our athletes were under. And they really, really were. And it was palpable leading up to the trials and trying to get into the trials. And then once they're at the trials, and I actually think that a lot of them are taking a breath of fresh air right now because they can focus on doing what they love. And even if they hadn't made it, so that, that pressure is kind of gone. And one of the things that, we've talked about several times when it comes to running or sports in general is that idea of stress is stress. And the more stress you're under, the more likely you are to get injured and not perform well. And so it's unfortunate that there's kind of this period of time where we have to perform at our best, but it's also the period of time where we're under so much pressure. There were a lot of great conversations, though, around the trials and leading up to the Olympics and now at the Olympics about mental health and sports. And I thought that was really good because it's really been highlighted a lot more this year than it has in previous years. And that was something I was very excited about.
Yeah. And I think, I think I think the announcers, the media, I think they're talking a lot more about these athletes as people now versus just their performance. And I think it comes from the side of like, okay, well, if we want to build and grow the sport, like the personalities are everything. That's what's going to get people behind it. So it comes kind of from a selfish and very like money driven endeavor, like almost everything is, right? But I think it helps kind of balance this out for people where these athletes are so much more than their placement or their times or what they've achieved, right? They have so much value to the sport, to themselves, to other people, regardless of any of those results. And I think the media is actually helping that. Again, it's kind of a catch-22 in terms of being really more trying to just earn more money. But at the same time, I think it's a really good thing.
I do think it's a good thing because there is this shift in trying to get track and field to be more fan-based. And we know that it's definitely moving in that direction. I mean, they did bring Snoop Dogg. I mean, that's all we have to say about that.
So excellent.
No, but seriously, there is a huge movement in terms of trying to highlight track and field athletes because we're some of the most underpaid athletes in the world. And it's really, really sad for the amount of work that they put into it every single day, every single hour. So it is nice to see that the sport is getting more attention. It's more exciting. And the media is really starting to shine a light on it, which is really nice. But we weren't going to talk about the Olympics today, but look at us because it's so exciting. You can't help it.
Sorry, my fault.
No, it's not your fault at all. I mean, I was thinking about it actually before this episode. I was thinking a lot about it, and I thought maybe we should do a whole episode about the Olympics, but this does it.
Yeah, well, maybe if we get ambitious, we can make another Olympics episode. But
that's right. Maybe we can ask one of our former guests and newly crowned Olympian back to talk a little bit.
Perhaps we can do that.
We have two actually. Two. So that's pretty cool.
Really cool. Really cool.
Okay, so let's break it down. Let's break down some stuff. Okay, so let's talk about track. If you could see Casey, the reason I'm laughing is because she's actually breaking it down and dancing right now. All
right, I broke it down. Now
let's break it down. Let's do it. Okay, so let's first talk a little bit about what is different between a track and field athlete versus, say, a distance runner in terms of the types of things that they need to look at. I'm going to back that up. I'm really sorry. I'm going to back that up and I'm going to say, let's actually look at the similarities across all types of running really quick. Because I think I'm doing this research study right now, and I'm having to read like 1,000 running articles, just so you know. And I read 100 today. And 100, after doing like 100 of these articles, one of the things that came up was this theme about different types of runners in different areas of running, not understanding how to apply basics like nutrition. So one of the things that I would like to say is it doesn't matter what kind of runner you are, whether you're a track athlete, a trail runner, an endurance runner, or you are a 5K runner, just maybe someone who goes out for a mile every day. You still have to think about your nutrition and the building blocks of what it makes to be a healthy athlete and healthy person. Your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep, your mental health, and then strength and mobility. Like those things across the board need to be addressed. how much of them, the type of food you eat, perhaps the type of exercise you do, more plyometrics versus, eccentrics versus heavy loading. Those all vary, but you still have to address those 7 kind of areas, no matter what kind of runner you are.
Right, absolutely. And this was sort of the a tagline I like to mention a lot is that if you take care of your health, the performance will follow eventually. And so, healthy and happy athletes are the ones that perform best. And I don't know, I think, again, I can think the culture is shifting a lot, but that hasn't always been the case. Or, it was more like who can work the hardest, who can, sacrifice the most, who can, all these other things, which I mean, there's elements of that, right? But I think if we can take care of ourselves and be the healthiest athletes that we can be, that's when we're going to have our best performances. So yeah, if we don't take care of all of these things that are happening off the track, off the road, off the trails, then we may have success for a short period of time. But in terms of long-term success and really reaching our potential, then we have to take care of all the little things.
That's right. And they're actually big things, but they seem little and they seem unimportant in a lot of ways. A lot of the articles I was reading today and yesterday were about perceptions of runners, and how runners thought each of these things, how they were important or how important they were. And then 1, if they either ranked them as important, and then 2, even if they knew the information, did they actually apply the information? So that's the thing. You can, if you don't know it, learn it. There's a lot of resources to learn it, which is, this is one of them. But then once you learn something and you hear it over and over again, like you need 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night, and you probably shouldn't be up on your phone using your phone because it'll keep you up late, then start applying it. And if you do those basic things, you're going to be far ahead of everybody else because most people don't even do those basic things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, after sort of those core health things, the strength and mobility, I think no matter what kind of runner you are, you should be doing some sort of strength work and some sort of mobility work as well. And yeah, it might change a little bit between different sports because there's a big plug for specificity and doing the lifting or the strength that's going to be most applicable to the type of running that you do. But I think that's a common theme for all of these athletes as well.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me get up on my soapbox and diverting the conversation slightly, but I know it is the most important. I just spoke at running camp last week or the week before, and that's one of the things that we're talking about. You need to slow down to get fast, and you have to address your basic needs, or you're not going to be able to perform, and you'll probably end up injured. So, okay, so let's talk track and field. Back again.
Yeah. So, when I think about how track is different than road running, for example, 3 things come to mind. There's probably more. The first one is being that you're always turning left when you're competing. And oftentimes when training, we talk about, switching directions and how we can help with that, but you're always turning left. Or not always turning left, but there's a lot more left turns and there's a very predictable stress on the body from the curves of the track. So that's something we have to consider, especially when we're looking at someone and they have a left-sided injury or they have a right-sided injury. You can think, okay, what is that right foot doing versus the left foot when we're turning, for example? Yep. The other thing is the equipment. So the shoe wear, a lot of times people are racing in spikes. I think spike technology has come a very far way and they're not quite, the Bill Bowerman, like making the mold in a waffle iron type of situation anymore, but they still are a very aggressive shoe. And it's something we've worked really hard with our Atlanta Track Club elites to learn how to use them as tools, when to use them in training, any sort of additional care, things that they need to do because spikes are hard on the body for most athletes. And then the last piece, of course, there's 5K and 10K on the track, which are more traditional distance events. But I mean, if you're a sprinter or you're running, 800 or the 1500, those are much more explosive events than 5K and above even. And of course, Kate and I are very familiar with marathons and, marathon is much, much different from a mile race.
Yes. So different.
Stating the obvious
I used to throw up for 5Ks because I thought that 5Ks were way too short. I can't, and like doing speed workouts that are like that are our athletes' races, I used to hate them. I would dread them. Whereas a marathon, I'd be just so happy to run it because I could go at a regular pace. But yeah, the distances are so different and they require different things.
Yeah. So the training is different. The lifting is different. The preparation for that is different because the intensity is so much higher. And I always kind of laugh because I'll always ask our elites what their workouts were. And, they've got these like 3-minute rests between intervals. And me being a marathoner, I'm like, that's an eternity. Like I could, go eat a sandwich in that amount of time. But anyway, I joke. But so those are the 3 things I think about that are different between a track athlete and a road or, distance athlete.
Yeah, I think you're right on it. And it's interesting too, when you watch, there's a lot more work with explosive movements, like you said. So some training days are like they're not even a lot of running. They're mostly just lots of drills, lots of form drills, lots of explosive drills, lots of power. So when you're doing those types of races and workouts, you've got to really put the power in, put these drills and make sure you're doing a lot of dynamic mobility more so than regular mobility, and making sure that your warm up is really pretty long so that you can do these explosive workouts.
And then, from a strength perspective, those athletes are going to be doing a lot more like heavier lifting. I think heavy lifting is good, is great for all athletes when used appropriately. But for them, this is like their bread and butter. Like this is really part of their normal training routine. And, if they do learn some sort of more explosive, like Olympic movements, you'll find that a lot of those like more mid-distance athletes will use that in their training to get some of that explosiveness as well. And so just that ability to really generate power very quickly is a big thing in the weight room for a lot of those athletes. And of course, if you're listening and you're like, oh, I want to try that out, make sure you learn form and have someone really like start light and teach you the proper form for a lot of these. And so this is sort of the tug in my brain, is that I want people to do these things, but it's a big, there's a lot of work on the front end to be able to incorporate those exercises.
Well, that's where patience comes into play, which many of us don't have, but really understanding. So starting with a foundation, just like we start with a foundation of good sleep and great food and all of that, we also have to start with a foundation for strength. And that is learning the movement patterns, being able to do the neuromuscular control, and then progressively loading to heavier weights. And if we can do that, then we are definitely going to be in a better place in all manners. That's one of the things I'd asked you to do for the RunSource app, right? You and I, we both did that. We worked on, here are the movements that you need, the foundations of strength. If you don't know the foundations, don't do the RDL, don't do the squat. Go to the foundational stuff first so that you know that you're doing it correctly, because you're going to get more out of a squat or a single leg activity if you know how to control the foot and you know how to control rotational movement. And you're able to do a hip hinge and you know how to breathe. Like all of these things are seem so simple and boring, but if you can do that, you're going to get so much more out of another kind of exercise that is more exciting, that's single leg and running specific.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning the foundations of strength, because I put a lot of work into trying to make that as concise as possible. Yeah. Right. And like, okay, what is truly foundational, right? And so putting that together was really fun for me, and I think super useful. And that actually changed a little bit of how I start exercises with people. Like I'd always taught pieces of it, but I was like, okay, like this is actually a framework I can use all the time.
Yes, it is.
And so that was really fun for me personally. But yes, the lifting is very important. And I actually watched Sprint, the Netflix documentary. I don't know if you've seen this.
Yeah. I haven't seen it. It's on my list, and I'm like the last person to watch it.
Yeah. So highly recommend. Obviously it's covering a lot of the drama in the event between the different athletes, but you do get little glimpses of what they do for training and practice. And I am like nerding out over it, like, because I've always wondered what that looks like. Because, it's not as much running. It's very much explosion and form and drills, right? Which is just very different from my world, right? And so I found it endlessly fascinating.
I actually love the drills. I love to go to practice and watch our athletes do the drills. And I actually have filmed them doing the drills and then I rewatch them because I just love the way that they look and like how it's all broken down. It's super nerdy. It's funny because I actually asked some of the athletes to record some of those drills for the app as well, because I was like, people need to know how to do these. And you don't want me showing them how to do them because you're better at it and you're the expert. Your form is so good. But yeah, it's there's so much more that goes into it than you even realize. And then, for track and field, there's so many different events. I mean, we're really talking mostly about track, not and field, but because we don't really see a lot of those athletes. We see the track athletes.
Right. Yeah. And again, when I'm watching I am always in awe of the field athletes, but I mostly think of it from an injury perspective, like watching how like a javelin thrower's like hyperextends at the elbow and like, oh God, I'm like cringing. And then how hard someone like slams the ground in triple jump and obviously like pole vault. I'm like, how is that even humanly possible?
Right. Yeah. No,
this is me watching track and field.
No, it's really interesting. And then also to kind of watch and see, I look at running form like you do. No matter what happens, I'm always looking at running form and what could be more efficient, what could be better. And then, of course, there are always these incredibly fast athletes that have the worst form that we would never touch because they're so fast, right? You just don't touch it. If some people you just don't touch. But then I also have this thing in the back of my mind where I'm like, well, if that looks a little bit better, would they run that much faster? And, there isn't tons of research on it. Some research says yes, some says no. So we don't really touch it when it looks like that. But in the build up to these big events, we may break it down because we do look at everybody's form really early on, but we would never do it that close to an event.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So let's move on. Let's move on to different. Do you want to talk road or do you want to talk trail, Case?
Kate, we didn't talk about spikes though. We got to talk about spikes.
Oh, I forgot about. Yeah, let's talk about spikes.
Most important thing from an injury perspective.
Well, it's the number one thing that we deal with actually. So is that transition from flats to spikes?
Yeah. So what our recommendation has been to our team and of course any athletes listening who do use spikes is to transition into them slowly. So not doing an entire workout in spikes when you decide today is the day I'm going to wear spikes. So maybe finishing the workout or even starting like when you're more fresh, doing a couple reps in them. I know this is a little bit in terms of dogma would be, I think a lot of coaches would like roll their eyes at me if I said that because it's like you finish fast, you finish in the spikes. But if you're just trying to get used to the spikes again, I think it actually might be a good idea to do when you're fresh. Anyway, it's a little bit of an aside. But just easing into them, right? And just tracking volume and just like you would run volume, track like spike run volume and making sure that you're easing into them appropriately.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And then the other thing that we did this year, which I know helped a lot because we didn't have as many foot and ankle injuries as we usually do, is we really made sure that they were focusing a little bit more on foot and ankle mobility and plyometrics before they made that transition into spikes, and then making sure that we have exercises within their strength training routines that really work on that kind of tendon spring and really working on those eccentrics, plyometrics, and mobility. Because if you don't have a mobile foot, you're going to obviously have to work around those restrictions. But also, if you can't tolerate the load that you're putting on the foot, that's going to be an issue. And then if you don't have enough strength in the foot, you're going to not be able to control that spike. So being able to add those kind of things early on into training and pepper them in with regular strength training, in addition to slowly increasing the amount of time in spikes, has really been helpful.
Yeah, that's been great. We haven't had nearly as many like Achilles issues, I think, specifically this year, which has been kind of a nice little experiment for us.
Yeah. Great. And good. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Nearly jumped ahead.
I know. Well, since you were going to let me choose, I think I'm going to say or what I consider best for last. People may disagree. A lot of people disagree. I know that trail running is a lot more fun from a lot of perspectives. I love all of the comparison between like the trail and the road runner. So like the road runners, I would need to have 112 grams of this gel and, whatever, all these specifics. And then, trail runners out there, like eating Sour Patch Kids and like whole pizzas on the run and drinking a beer at an aid station, all this stuff. So it's a very different, it's a very different world, I think.
It's a different culture. It's been really, it's interesting because just like when an Ironman athlete comes into the clinic, you can tell that they're an Ironman athlete. Well, you can tell if someone's a trail runner. You can tell if somebody's, running a marathon, typically by what they wear, how they present themselves, like if they're, their kind of personality. And of course, that's very general. Okay, that's generalization.
Absolutely.
And that's not always true, but it's very common for us to be able to kind of pick it out when someone walks in the door. One thing I actually love about trail running, and I think is really, really cool, is there's a lot of research that is about the impact of being out in nature on your mental and emotional health, and also your physiological health. So like that's like cardiovascular system, that is your hormones, all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of positive research about being out in the woods for a certain amount of time every single day can impact your health in a positive way across the board. So I think that that's one benefit that trail runners really, really do have over everybody else, if everybody else doesn't actually take time to spend it in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what I hear a lot of trail runners talk about, right? Is that it's so relaxing. They're so happy when they're out in the woods, by themselves with their trail snacks. And that's, they just really, that's what they really love. And I think most of us really love that, actually. I think just some people prioritize it a little bit more. They're more likely to gravitate towards the different challenge of running on the trails.
It also depends on where you live, like accessibility. So some places it's really easy to go out on the trails every single day. But in big cities like New York or Atlanta or Boston, even though there's places you can go outside the city, it's not as easy to walk out your door and go on the trail. So that's where a lot of runners who are just, doing it for health end up on the streets.
Right.
That sounds funny. End up on the streets. So when it comes to trail running, it sounds like we talk about the foot all the time, and I think we do. I think we're pretty sure we do. But when it comes to trail running, one of the things that I definitely make sure that we work on with our trail athletes is that kind of proprioception balance and ability to kind of move through the different planes of the foot and the ankle a little bit easier. So really working on that balance, proprioception, and single leg strength is so very important because the terrain is so different.
Right. And so, you think about the road, by and large, every foot strike is the same. And on the trails, hardly any foot strike is the same between, one from the other. And so there's, and this is a good thing to a certain extent. I think it kind of can prevent some overuse issues, but at the same time, it can be so taxing because you're having to use so many different muscle groups and stabilize over and over and over again when you're running on the trails. So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, doing single leg exercises and really thinking about endurance because there's so much time when we think about time on feet, right? Like any run on the trail is going to take a lot more time than on the road. And especially if you're trying to train or you're going to train for one of these really, really long ultra marathon events on the trail, you want to make sure your feet are really strong because that's the last thing you want is like foot cramps or, every step to just be agonizing just because you don't have the foot control there.
That's right. I think time on feet is actually a really good point. So if you think about trail racing versus on the road or out the door of your house, there are a lot of research articles out there about time on feet and some new ones that I know are coming out. I know a researcher who's working on them about how the more time you spend on your feet in total, whether it is actual running or if it's on your feet during the day, like our job, Casey, where we're on our feet for 8 hours a day seeing patients, that counts as time on feet towards that kind of injury index. And so it is a really interesting idea and thing to think about, because if you're going to be, even though you're not going as fast or as hard in a lot of cases, in terms of time, you're having to challenge different systems and you are spending more time on your feet, which still makes the injury level not any different than if you were running on the roads.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, sort of along that same vein, a lot of obviously there can be trails that are a little bit more tame in terms of elevation gain, but I'd say most of these races are having a lot of elevation gain and or loss. And so I think a lot of trail runners prepare for the gain a lot, and rightfully so, because that's what's going to tax your cardiovascular system the most. But what's going to tax your muscular system a lot more is the downhills. And I don't I don't know if athletes put as much emphasis on that. They're just like, oh yeah, downhills are going to suck. And it's like, no, there's things you can do to help your resiliency going downhill. And some of it's, working on that in training. And then, this is where the strength training and doing eccentric exercises can really help to off of the trails.
That's right. And then even doing things as simple as doing, single leg work on a slant board. So you're going in that kind of downhill, more eccentrically loaded position can help with trail racing, or, training for like a Boston course that's more downhill. Like those kinds of things are important to think about. So yeah, I think that eccentric component and that downhill component is something that is often overlooked. Just like the nutrition, you'd mentioned the differences between trail and kind of road running before, but again, with this research study I'm working on, I'm looking at there's a ton of articles about nutrition and trail racing. And almost every one of them says that people who are doing trail races don't actually know what they're supposed to be doing with nutrition. And it's one of the number one things that they're missing and that they get in trouble with when they're on these big ultra endurance events. So dialing in your nutrition is key in really understanding what that means. And a lot of times people are thinking they're eating enough and they're so undernourished and their energy is so low and their brain is foggy because they're just not getting enough calories in. And same thing with hydration. There's a lot of issues with making sure you're keeping up with the amount of hydration out on the trails, more so on the trails than it is on the road.
Yeah. Nutrition is something I think if you're going to take on a big trail race, if it's your first one or it's a vastly different distance, then like working with a sports nutritionist to help you kind of navigate that, I think would be extremely helpful, because there's some trial and error and you have to take the data like, okay, I took this much water, this much calories, I used these products, I used these types of foods, this is what happened. Having someone to help you put that puzzle together is really helpful, and it's going to get you to that optimal fueling plan faster than if you're just trying to experiment on your own. So I think that's a great investment. It doesn't have to be forever, but just to kind of learn what works best for you and your body. And it seems like you've been reading a lot more research than I have, Kate. But
I have to, because I'm doing research right now. So I'm doing doing lit reviews.
Yeah. So, but what I have read, when I have read some research that's more on the nutrition side of things, so not necessarily PT articles, but they're coming out with these higher and higher carb amounts for being ideal or for being performance enhancing. So the conclusion from a lot of these articles is, as much as you're able to tolerate from a GI perspective and a processing perspective, the better.
I read that too.
As fueled as possible. And sometimes I've definitely heard of athletes overshooting that, and unfortunately, like the trial and error, you don't know until you try it on your body. But as much as you can tolerate is what's going to give you the biggest performance boost and help you feel good throughout the duration of the race.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I also think those are kind of the biggest things when it comes to trail racing and road racing, is thinking about foot and ankle mobility, about proprioception, about balance, eccentric control, running downhill, thinking about cardiovascular strength in terms of being able to climb, and then also really dialing in your nutrition and your hydration.
Yeah. And then, making the decision of what shoes to use and any hiking poles. Those are kind of special parts of equipment that it's helpful to ask, what other athletes have done the particular event that you're planning on doing, like what kind of equipment did they use? That can be helpful too. Some people love the hiking poles, some people hate them. So just one of those things to kind of ask around and see what people have preferred.
Yep. I think that's right. All right, let's move on to distance. 5K to marathon distance, kind of road racing, road running, and kind of talk about some of the things that you need to focus on more if that's what you're going to be doing. So I think, first of all, we're saying the same thing across the board. Basic needs are important. Just because you're running on the road doesn't mean you don't need to address nutrition and sleep and hydration. because you still need to do that. And then making sure you're in the appropriate footwear. So again, we don't use spikes and we don't use trail running shoes for this. We're mostly in some kind of trainer. And then, what does it look like to train for an event like this? How are we fitting it into our lives? A lot of times people who are doing road running are people who are trying to find whatever time they can during the day to get out and run. And so their life may or may not be more hectic, but a lot of times it tends to draw that kind of type A personality that's doing a million things at once. So managing kind of that stress is really, really important for this group of people.
Yeah. And again, kind of like looking at your lifestyle and the support that you have in place, and it plays a big role on like when you run, right? So, for example, if you're kind of looking at, okay, I'm going to do this marathon, for example, and that means I'm going to have to be more consistent with my running. Based on all these factors, it looks like I'm going to have to get out and run at 5:30 in the morning, because that's what's going to work for me and my family. Okay, well, how are we going to make that work without really depleting your sleep and your fueling needs and things like that? So we have to have a plan in place to make sure you get to bed on time, that we have breakfast ready to go if you're going to be rushing to get to work, things like this. So making sure that we have a plan in place that if we are going to shift things around, that we accommodate for that, right? Because I oftentimes see too many people shorten their amount of sleep to try to fit this in. And like Kate was mentioning, this can really affect our recovery and our injury risk as well. So really figuring out what's going to be best. And, some people aren't morning runners, and so that's totally fine too.
I hate the morning. I always after work in Atlanta, you kind of have to do it in the morning. So let's start with that. I have to do it in the morning because of the temperature. But when I lived in Boston, I would run after work every single day because I just wanted to run my day away. So yeah, planning whatever that looks like for you in your life. Can you run in the afternoon or not? Now that I have a family, that doesn't work out either, because after school is after school. But, planning, how and when you're going to run is really important. And that goes for what races you pick too, right? So if we're kind of thinking about that stress idea, if you're going to pick, say you're going to run a marathon in May, for instance, right? Well, if you're a mom or a dad, you may not want to pick May in Atlanta because May is the last month of school. And there are a zillion things you need to be going to and so many things that you need to coordinate for your children or whatever it is. And because you have to do that, that increases your stress level, your cortisol levels in your body, that decreases your sleep. You're running around, you're maybe not fueling appropriately because you're not thinking about your food. You're thinking about how can you get, your family on board. So planning where you race, what time of year. Don't plan big events the same time that you put your marathon.
Yes, exactly. And, same thing, thinking about, do you want to be training through the holiday season or not? So, that there are a few races that might be in January or February, and that means getting some long runs in around the holidays and in December and things like that. And so, and this involves communication too, right? With your partner, with your support team, because we can't do this alone. We never do this alone. And so that communication in terms of how you're going to shift, duties in the house or, accommodate for having to lay on the couch after a long run. Hopefully, if you fueled right, you don't feel like you need to lay on the couch for too long, but, definitely get some grace after a long run. But just communication with your support team, right? And building a support team. I think we didn't talk about that actually.
That's important for all the different types of running, is building a support team, whether it's a medical team or your family and your friends or all of the above.
Right. Yeah. So that's one thing I think we might have left off. And so I just think about it when I think about marathons, because I think that's what I'm talking about with my patients most. But
yeah.
Then the support in place.
Yep. And then again, same idea that we talked about with other things, making sure you're fueling appropriate, making sure that you're fueling properly before you run, during your run, and after your run for recovery. So knowing what that looks like, depending on if you're running, a 5K or a marathon or an ultra marathon, there's a different plan and you need a different amount of fuel and different types of fuel based on the event that you're doing. And again, we're always plugging all these other professions besides PTs because they're so important. You can get You can see a sports dietitian from anywhere most of the time. A lot of people do have multiple licenses and do Zoom now consults, which is really, really helpful. So making sure that you know how to fuel and when and how much is really important. And then again, when it comes to strength, thinking about how are we going to strength train for an endurance event versus maybe like a sprinting event or a trail race?
I think the answer is it's going to be somewhere in between. And so I mentioned, I think in the beginning of the episode, in terms of heavy lifting being a staple of sprinting. And I think heavy lifting can and is beneficial for long distance athletes as well, but we have to sort of be smart in how we do it, right? So having like a strength building phase and then moving into more of a maintenance phase when we're doing these really long marathon specific runs, for example. Of course, I'm talking about the marathon, but this is going to apply for any of your events. If as you get closer to the event and the running becomes more specific, we don't want the strength training to kind of drain our battery before we really need to use it in an important workout, for example. So just having considerations around the event and our training load and training volume and being smart in how we modify how heavy we're lifting, for example. But again, like a lot of the same principles apply in terms of being able to control foot and ankle and hip and the breathing, abdominal muscles, posture, all of those things are important. And this is where someone like a physical therapist can come in, can do some run gait analysis, which I feel like is super valuable because it's been validated that treadmill gait analysis and overground are close enough to where we can glean a lot of information for that. And so we can get the most specific picture of how to prevent injuries based on your running form.
You still should be doing plyometrics and dynamic movements and rotational strength when it comes to these types of races, because for instance, plyometrics are also great for making sure you have good bone health and tendon health. So those things are important because if we think about our bones and our tendons, those are really two areas that long distance running, people get injured all the time. So adding plyometrics to that kind of strength training program is super important. And then also making sure that your off day is an off day, right? So there used to be this idea where you didn't, where after you ran, you wouldn't do strength training, or before you ran, you wouldn't do strength training the same day. But that's not always the case. Some people, and again, everybody's schedule is different, and what your needs are different, and what your life looks like is very different. But you can strength train on the days that you run, and that's okay. It's better to have a full day off if you can.
This works really well for me. I've been doing it for a few years now, where I do my lift on my harder running days, so my speed workout and my long run. Obviously, I have to adjust if I am feeling a little worn down and tired, and luckily I know my body well enough. And I think most of us, if we really listen, we know our body well enough to make those adjustments. And even if you are feeling tired, you can still do some strength work, right? So it's not be like, oh, I'm tired, I'm not going to do my strength workout. Pick a few things that you feel like you can still work on and do those things. Do what you can, right? Something is better than nothing.
I always say, I don't care if you just do 3 exercises. That's enough. Like if that's all you can do, it's better than none. So just knowing that. And Casey, I think that it's okay for you to do your really hard workouts as well as your strength on the same day, because you get lots of dance breaks in between.
How do you know that?
I know all about your dance breaks. You strength train in our office.
I know, and there's a camera.
No, I think it's mostly Instagram. You do it to yourself, girl.
Oh, I do it to myself.
I don't actually look at the camera most of the time. Kay does.
I know. That's why I'm like,
But I think that, anybody who's worried about recovery, they should just figure out a good dance routine for in between their strength and their running.
Yeah. Dancing is somewhat plyometric. So
jumping, you could add the jumps, right?
Yeah, add the jumps.
All right. I think this is good. I think that we've really kind of gone through each of the types. We've talked a lot today. This is a really long episode, I think. I haven't timed it, but about all the different kinds of running, what you kind of need to know about each one. And then we even got some bonus discussion around the Olympics.
Yeah. Always fun to hang out and nerd out with you, Kate.
Yeah, you too. And thanks so much for listening, you guys. We are so grateful that you spend time with us, even when we sometimes go down these rabbit holes talking about dancing and other things. But have a great day, and we will talk with you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening today. We are so happy that you're here. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend. Even better, share it on social media, because sharing is caring. And the more people we can reach, the better.
Another way you can help us out is by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. So give us those 5 stars and tell us how awesome we are. Really, we love to hear how awesome we are. To support our work financially, you can also join our Patreon squad at patreon.com/morethanmiles, where for a few dollars a month, you can help us keep the show going and growing.
This season is sponsored by Fast Bananas. Why buy multiple subscriptions made for everyone when you can have one specifically crafted for runners? Fast Bananas has online yoga classes, strength training programs, meditations, recipes, communities to ask questions, and so much more. Check out Fast Bananas at fastbananas.com or follow them on Instagram at fastbananasrun.
Don't forget that training is so much more than miles.